Hello everyone, it's Matthew Lolte Hepworth from Ask.Audio, and today we're going to be comparing 4 different microphones, including the brand new Roswell Delphos microphone, and this video is a companion to our full review of the Delphos at Ask.Audio. But let's take a look at the 4 different microphones that we're going to be listening to today, and just like all of the other microphone reviews that I've done, we're not trying to pick the best sounding microphone. All of these microphones sound really good in their own right, but this comparison is going to allow you to hear the differences on the exact same source material. So let's look at the 4 different microphones that we're going to be comparing today. First, we'll have the Technica AT4050. This is a very popular microphone and it's been around a long time, and they sell for about $699. And it has a 25mm or basically 1-inch diaphragm. The next microphone is an AKG SolidTube. Now, this one is not available anymore, so this is one of mine. I have a pair of them, and I have modified them with a different tube. I used a Telefunken smooth plate tube, and I also ripped the foam out of the grill to make the microphone sound a little bit more open. So if you found a used SolidTube and you modified it the way that I did, it would cost you about $550. But just like the Technica, it also has a 25mm or 1-inch diaphragm. The next microphone is the Neat King Bee, which sells for about $349, and it has a larger diaphragm. It's 34mm or 1.34 inches, which happens to be the exact same size as the Roswell Delphos, which sells for $899. So the Neat and the Roswell both have the same size diaphragm, and that's going to play a role in this comparison. So let's take a look at the placement of all of those microphones. You can see that all of the elements were placed as closely together as possible, and the sources that we recorded, which are a male vocal and also an acoustic guitar, were about 12 to 18 inches away to reduce the proximity effect of all of the different microphones. And that's how we keep this test as fair as we possibly can. So now let's do some listening, and you can see that I've recorded all 4 microphones on 8 different tracks. Now these first 4 tracks are going to be a male vocal, and we're going to start with microphone number 1, and just like all my other microphone comparisons, I'm not going to tell you which microphone is which until the end of the video. And so for right now, we're just going to be listening to the microphones. So I fast-forwarded through this track because I want to get the sound of both the subtle part or the lower intensity part of the vocal track, and then we'll get into the intense part and listen to that. So let's start playback on microphone number 1.
When you want to call her mine, and you sip expensive wine, grab a pass and stand in line. You're my water sign.
Now this microphone happens to be a very, very natural sounding microphone. It reminds me a little bit of a TLM 102 or a 103, but let's take a look at the frequency response. You can see that it's pretty flat through most of the mid-range, but it has a little bit of a bump from 100 Hertz down to 20 Hertz. So it has a little tiny bit more richness in the low end, and then there's a tiny bump at about the, 4 kilohertz mark, and it's so tiny you'll have to look at the scale on the left-hand side of the graph, because you can see that it's only about 1.5 or maybe 2 dB at the most at 4 kilohertz. And then it comes right back down to 0. But then at around 11,000 hertz, we get a little bit of a bump again, and then it starts to roll off towards the almost 14 kilohertz mark. So very, very flat response with only a few little bumps, and again, they're very, very tiny. And so now that you have seen that frequency response, let's listen to this microphone a little bit more in the more intense part of the track.
Look at the snow and drink hot tea, now that I can call you mine. And if we two never ride
Now let's listen to microphone number 2. I'm going to start it in the more nuanced section of the vocal track.
When you want to call her mine, and you sip expensive wine, grab a pass and stand in line, you're my water sign.
Now, if we look at the frequency response of microphone number 2, you can see that it's also very flat through most of the mid-range, but it has a roll-off starting at about 50 hertz and going down to 20 hertz, and it's almost 8 dB that it rolls off to. Then it stays flat all the way up to about 2 kilohertz, and then there's a pretty significant bump at about 6 kilohertz, and that has a tiny dip and then goes up even higher to about 5 dB at 10 kilohertz. Then it starts to roll off a little bit at about 15 kilohertz and rolls off up to 20 kilohertz. So this particular microphone has a little bit brighter response, and if we listen to the intense part of the track, you can hear that brightness.
That I can call you mine, and if we two never rhyme, but if horoscopes don't lie, you're my water sign.
So microphone number 2 definitely doesn't have a hyped sound. It's just a little bit brighter than microphone number 1, and it also happens to be the brightest of all the microphones. So now let's listen to microphone number 3.
When you want to call her mine, and you sip expensive wine, grab a pass and stand in line, you're my water sign.
Now, microphone number 3 comes off as a little bit boxy sounding on this particular vocal track, and I would typically use this microphone more on a female vocal track. But if we look at the frequency response, it is a little bit similar on the low end to microphone number 1, in that it has a little bit of a boost at this point from about 80 hertz instead of 100 hertz. It's a tiny bump all the way down to 20 hertz. Then it's pretty flat up until about 1 kilohertz. Then it gets a little bit noodly until we see a significant, well, not highly significant, but enough of a bump at about 6 kilohertz. Then it settles back down to 0 again. There's a bump at 10 kilohertz, another tiny bump at 15, then it rolls off past 16 kilohertz. So let's listen to microphone number 3 at the more expressive part of the vocal track.
Look at the snow and drink hot tea, now that I can call you mine. And if we two never rhyme, but if horoscopes don't lie, you're my water sign.
Now let's listen to microphone number 4.
When you want to call her mine, and you sip expensive wine, grab a pass and stand in line, you're my water sign.
So let's look at the frequency response of microphone number 4, and you can see that it is pretty flat, even down to 50 hertz. That's where it starts to have a little bit of a natural roll-off. Then it's pretty flat up until 1 kilohertz, and then interestingly, there's a little bit of a dip at 2 kilohertz. Not much, maybe just a decibel, but then it flattens out again with another bump at about 4 kilohertz, settles back down to 0 again, and then there's a pretty significant bump between 7 kilohertz and actually all the way up to about 16 kilohertz, and then it rolls off towards 20 kilohertz. So this is one of the more unique frequency response charts that we're going to see in this test. Now let's listen to microphone number 4 in the louder portion of the vocal track.
I can call you mine, and if we two never rhyme, but if horoscopes don't lie, you're my water sign, my water sign.
So microphone number 4 has that presence boost. Again, it's not hyped, but it does sound a little bit more like microphone number 2 than the other microphones in this comparison. Now, there's another thing I want to talk about before we compare all 4 of those microphones, and that's noise. So I'm going to go out here to my RX5 editor, and I've got a quiet portion of all 4 of those vocal tracks loaded in here and zoomed in pretty close, but I'm going to zoom in on the amplitude of the spectral display so that we can really see any noise that might exist in this quietest of sections. So if you look at the volume of the waveform display here between all 4 of these microphones, you can see that the levels themselves are almost perfectly identical. I try my best to get those as close as possible. But let's take a look at some of the noise that these microphones have just as they're plugged into the exact same microphone preamps. In this case, it was a Steinberg MR816. So all 4 microphones are using identical preamps with nothing in between. And I should mention that none of those tracks had any sort of processing on them at all. So no compression, no de-essing, nothing. They're just the flat tracks. But let's look at the noise now. Here's microphone number 1, and you can see that it's a pretty quiet microphone. If we go to microphone number 2 actually is a little bit quieter. So if we look at those 2 and bounce back and forth between them, here's 1, 2, 1, 2. You can see that in this area, microphone number 1 is a little bit noisier than microphone number 2. If we look at microphone number 3, well, it's a little noisy. So it's about as noisy as microphone number 1. There's not much difference between 1 and 3. Actually, 3 is a little bit noisier. But then we come along to microphone number 4, and we're going to see some interesting things here. First, it's a little noisy. And we also see some hum down here at about 180 hertz. And then there's another really thin little band right here at about, I would say, 16.5 or 17 kilohertz. So this is the noisiest microphone of all of them in the bunch, with microphone number 2 being the quietest. And let's look at them again. Here's microphone number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now let's go back out to Cubase here and let's listen to all 4 of those tracks, and I'm going to switch between them during playback. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut, but what you'll want to do is watch the track selection here to see which microphone you're currently listening to.
When you want to call her mine and you sip expensive wine, grab a pass and stand in line. You're my water sign. Can you say you gave it your all? Did you think she'd wait for your call? Did you think she'd catch if you'd fall? Then you have Neptune blessing you. Drive away to Park City. Look at the snow and drink hot tea, now that I can call you mine. And if we two never rhyme, but if horoscopes don't lie, you're my water sign, my water sign.
Now let's quickly listen to the guitar tracks, and I specifically did some very, very light guitar work on these tracks so that you could hear the nuances, because in just a moment here when I reveal which microphone is which, that sensitivity of each microphone is going to play an important role. So now I'm going to rewind and switch between all 4 of these tracks again, and I'll do it kind of quickly so that we can get on to the reveal. So now that you've had a chance to listen to all 4 microphones, it's time to find out which mic was which. So what I decided to do is take the alphabetical order of the manufacturers and do them in reverse. So microphone number 1 was the Roswell Delphos. Microphone number 2 was the Neat King Bee. Microphone number 3 was the Audio-Technica AT4050. And microphone number 4 was the modified AKG SolidTube. As you'll remember, microphone number 4 was the noisiest of the bunch, and you typically do get a little bit of noise anytime you're using tube electronics. But what's really interesting is that the Roswell Delphos has a 40 millivolts per Pascal sensitivity. That would make it the most sensitive microphone I've ever tested, and the nuance that it revealed in my tests was really, really obvious. And the Neat King Bee, that also has a 34mm or 1.34-inch diaphragm, is the next most sensitive microphone at 26 millivolts per Pascal. Then if we look at the sensitivity of the 1-inch diaphragm microphones, the Audio-Technica was the least sensitive at 15.8 millivolts per Pascal, and the AKG SolidTube is slightly more sensitive at 20 millivolts per Pascal. So those larger diaphragm microphones are definitely going to pick up more nuances in your recordings. So now that you know how the Roswell Delphos sounds compared to some other really popular microphones, you can now read the full review of the Delphos at Ask.Audio. My name is Matthew Lolte Hepworth, and thanks for watching and listening.